Hello, I'm Hazem Seeker. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week,
iPhone 10.
We'll look at how Apple's iPhone economics made it the most profitable company in the world. Also this week, Myanmar, how the Jade trade, land grabs, and vested interests are playing a part in what the UN calls ethnic cleansing. And a showdown month in France. Can President Emmanuel Macron deliver on labor market reforms? So over the past decade, the iPhone has transformed Apple into the world's most profitable and biggest technology company. The launch of a new iPhone has a big influence on how the internet economy is taking shape around us. A host of app developers, chip makers, and other industries depend on the Apple economy for survival. And business owners, too, want to be able to work on the world's most popular smartphone. And now many people are worried about Apple's dominant position with its suppliers and customers. Apple doesn't even have to be price competitive. Its newest model, the iPhone 10, is the world's most expensive iPhone ever. According to analysts at IHS, the cost of the components inside a typical iPhone add up to around $200. Apple maintains that teardown price does not take into account the time and money spent on research, software, and transport. Gabriel Elizondo reports from New York.
This is iPhone 10.
An annual event for Apple with billions of dollars of future sales on the line.
You are my best friend and we've got some things to do.
Front and center stage was a device called iPhone 10, known as the iPhone X. Apple probably hopes consumers interpret the X as standing for extraordinary and not expensive.
Every time you glance at your iPhone 10, it detects your face.
It does come with new face scanning technology that allows the user to unlock the phone and introduces what they're calling animojis that can turn one's facial expressions into emojis.
By mapping more than 50 facial muscles in real time.
It was all unveiled at Apple's new state-of-the-art headquarters, which reportedly cost $5 billion to build. Someone has to pay for that. The price of the new phone might help.
The new iPhone is the most expensive phone Apple has ever released, more than double the price of the first iPhone released more than a decade ago, leaving many to wonder if this new phone is nothing more than an expensive toy for those fortunate enough to be able to buy it.
In many countries, the monthly median income doesn't even come close to the price tag of the new phone. For example, in Brazil, households make just $627 a month. In China, it's $515, meaning a household would need to work 2 months to afford the phone. And in Nigeria, at $222, the average family makes only a fourth of what one new iPhone 10 costs.
I think they stick to their core principles of design first and excellence, and they price it with those things in mind. I don't think they deliberately try to come up with an economy model of things, but yeah, they have their target market and they stick to it.
On the streets of New York, there were mixed reactions to the steep price of the new phone.
I think it's a little bit expensive, and I'm okay with the one I have now.
That's a lot of money, right?
I mean, hey, if it could do magic tricks around that, I'll buy it.
The future of the smartphone.
Apple once again showing it's a company that can dazzle its fans with innovative technology, but now more than ever, it comes at a steep price.
So joining us now from London is Daniel Gleeson. He is a consumer technology analyst with London-based digital research and consulting firm Ovum. Thanks for being with us. So let me ask you, first of all, what do you make then of these new iPhones? Do they maintain Apple's status as a global leader?
I think definitely the iPhone 10 is very revolutionary for Apple. It really has abandoned a lot of the old design maxims that it worked to. It has discarded key and iconic features of the iPhone range, such as the home button. So it really moves on the iPhone range.
Let's talk a little bit more about that Apple 10 then. It's being priced at $1,000. That seems like a lot of money to pay for a phone. I mean, do they really need to do that, particularly when you look at, in the case of Apple, the costs of making a phone are a lot less than that?
the price here is really driven by two main factors. For starters, the premium smartphone market is very heavily saturated. There's no organic growth. So for Apple, the only way for it really to grow, continue growing revenues for iPhone is to actually raise prices. Secondly, the components, many of the components involved in building the iPhone X are actually quite limited in supply. So by having a very high price, Apple also is limiting the demand to some extent for the iPhone X and should help curtail any shortages it might have.
And what does this do for Apple's economy, if you will? Because it has this whole kind of ecosystem and economy that is very much individual to Apple, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think actually this entire range of devices has been extremely good for the entire Apple ecosystem. Probably the most important part of it is within the new update to iOS. You have ARKit, an alternative reality system, and you have an AI chip built into the new iPhone X. So these are key features which will help build, which will enable Apple to build an AI and smart home ecosystem that is very, very powerful and very strong and most importantly, very unique to Apple. No other handset manufacturer at the moment has any AI capabilities built in, and in particular, none of the other big smartphone brands have the same sort of presence in other devices and the same strength across the home that Apple can have, that Apple can leverage to really build a very strong entire platform based around these AI solutions.
But should Apple be concerned, though, about the pushback that it's continuing to get from the European Union?
I do think Apple needs to be very wary of the kind of the competition implications of a lot of what it's doing and a lot of its tax arrangements. I think, however, Apple is in a much better position to fight a lot of these issues than compared to someone like Google, due to the fact that Google's problems are more from a point of view of its dominant position in search, whereas Apple is just more of a technical and legal problem with referring to tax. As a result, Apple's fundamental business is in no way threatened by whatever happens with regards to the EU. Its business is not going to get broken up. It is not going to have any sort of serious implications on the market. Apple or Facebook or anyone else who is going to be running into problems at the EU level, it's mostly going to be on a competition basis, which is a much riskier proposition from the point of view of their fundamental businesses.
Good to speak with you. Daniel Gleeson joining us there from London. Thank you. The Frankfurt Motor Show is underway, and this year it is electric cars taking center stage. Volkswagen and Daimler both announced on Monday they're heading in that direction. And the scandal over Volkswagen's fake emissions test 2 years ago may have helped them along. Charlotte Bellis reports.
Volkswagen Media Night in Frankfurt ahead of the world's biggest annual motor show. 2 years after the company's emissions scandal, Volkswagen's chief executive is showing the product of some commercial soul-searching.
This is our commitment. By 2030, we will have electrified our entire range of vehicles. I think we're on a right and progressive track.
The company paid out $4.3 billion in criminal and civil fines after it admitted cheating on US diesel emissions tests. Now, Volkswagen, which includes brands Audi, Bentley, Lamborghini and Porsche, will double its investment in zero-emission vehicles to $24 billion. It will offer 80 electric cars across the group by 2025.
The emotional debate about driving bans in inner cities, about the future of the diesel car and about electric mobility shows that the times when our industry here in Frankfurt celebrated itself and patted itself on the shoulder are over. Business as usual is no longer enough.
Critics say German manufacturers are way behind in the electric car market, but the emissions scandal has raised public pressure to speed up the transition. Daimler announced on Monday it would make an electric model of all Mercedes-Benz vehicles by 2022. 3 years later, BMW, which includes Mini and Rolls-Royce brands, will offer 25 electric vehicles in its range. By 2030, Volkswagen says all of its 300 models will have an electric option.
There's a theme very popular that's gotten very popular in the last 4 to 6 weeks is predictions of 12 to 20 years out, claiming that this country won't have any internal combustion engines, and or this car company won't have any internal combustion engines. How accountable all of these countries and companies will be to it, that's a long time out, so it's hard to predict.
France and the United Kingdom say they will ban the sale of fully gas or diesel cars from 2040. China, the world's largest car market, just announced it is planning a similar move.
And still to come on Counting the Cost, 100 days of the Gulf crisis. We'll look at how Qatar's economy is faring. Our global pressure is mounting on Myanmar and its leader Aung San Suu Kyi to end the killing and displacement of Muslim Rohingya. Over the past few weeks, nearly 400,000 people escaping violence in Myanmar's eastern state of Rakhine have streamed into Bangladesh, creating a humanitarian crisis. The UN Security Council has condemned the violence against the Rohingya people, calling it ethnic cleansing. Land grabs and vested economic interests may also be playing a part in the country's religious and ethnic tensions. A natural resource exploitation in Myanmar is widespread. One example is how its jade industry is run. Nearly all of the world's jade, a near translucent green stone, comes from the hills of Myanmar's north. The industry was worth $31 billion in 2014. That's according to a report by Global Witness. That is as big as half the GDP that year for all of Myanmar. But none of that money is reaching ordinary people or state coffers. Instead, the sector is secretly controlled by networks of military elites. Most stones are smuggled over the border to neighboring China. Well, joining us from London is Paul Donowitz. Paul is a campaign leader at Global Witness. Thanks for being with us, Paul. So I want to ask you, first of all, in this report, you have called what's happening here possibly the biggest natural resource heist in modern history. Why is that? Explain that.
Yeah, thanks for having us. So our year-and-a-half investigation in Myanmar found that the jade sector, production of jade in 2014 equaled $31 billion, which would be 48% of Myanmar's gross domestic product, and 46 times the spending on healthcare that the government spent. So these findings led us to the conclusion that this was, in fact, the biggest natural resource heist in history.
Is there a connection then between the jade industry and what is happening right now with the Rohingya community?
Yeah, I think you have to look, take a step back and understand the context. So the military in Myanmar has an outsized role in politics, the economy, and the social life of the country by virtue of the Constitution, which guarantees it 25% and a veto-proof standing to change the Constitution. Also, the military controls key sectors of the economy, and by virtue of this special status, the military really remains outside of civilian control. The civilian government can't hold the military accountable for any actions or abuses it commits against ethnic people, including against the self-identified Rohingya.
And Myanmar is a resource-rich nation, oil and gas being among them. There are pipelines being built right now to connect Myanmar to China. These projects claim to benefit the whole country with employment, transit fees, oil and gas revenues, and so on. But are they doing that? What impact are they having on local people?
Right. So there's a offshore gas field that's been built, and oil and gas pipelines to transport Myanmar's gas and foreign oil to Yunnan, China. And instead of providing jobs and job growth and employment and really spurring the economy, what we've seen is that instead they've engendered resentment amongst local people who feel that they are not deriving benefits from these projects. There's issues around land grabs and displacement, and in fact, we're seeing now another mega development project, an economic zone up in Rakhine State that is fueling additional resentment. So these mega projects, which in theory, could provide benefits to local people instead of having the opposite impact, and are really only furthering distrust to the central government and the military, and further marginalizing local people, which is not helping the situation in Rakhine at present.
Paul Donowitz in London, good to speak to you.
Thank you.
Now, it's a showdown month in France for President Emmanuel Macron. He's attempting to reform the labour market, but critics say the proposed changes will wipe out hard-won protections for workers. Paul Brennan was at a demonstration in Paris.
France's unemployment is at almost 10% and economic growth is stubbornly low. But where these union members and the president disagree is on the solution to that. The CGT union is one of France's largest, representing huge numbers of public sector workers and low-paid staff. The president says his plans to make it easier for bosses to hire and fire will turn the page on 3 decades of inefficiency. But these people are deeply concerned.
We are protesting Mr. Macron's labour law. It's a bad law against workers.
But what these union members see as important protections, global financial institutions such as the IMF see as deep-rooted structural rigidities. France's complex employment laws and tax regime often act as a disincentive for companies to expand. President Macron's proposals would, for example, allow companies with fewer than 20 staff to negotiate pay and conditions direct with the workers, instead of having to involve the unions. J'Expertise is a small but successful French surveying company which checks buildings for structural movement. Its boss agrees that more streamlined employment laws are overdue.
Employers and employees want to talk to each other. They want to decide their common future. They no longer want 1 or 2% of the population telling them what they have to do and telling them that they know better what's best for them.
The marchers, though, are clear who they trust to do what's better for them.
A September showdown is looming here in France. The president has described those who would oppose his plans as being either lazy or cynical or extremists. But the unions who have mustered their forces out here on the streets of Paris and elsewhere are determined they will oppose what they see as a diminution of their extensive powers.
A fringe group of around 300 troublemakers started throwing projectiles at police, who responded with tear gas and water cannon. But although the vast majority of the demonstrators were peaceful, tensions are rising. The president is putting his political reputation on the line with these plans. Regardless of the protests, he will sign the measures into law at the end of this month. But at what cost to his standing in the country?
Well, joining me from Paris is Véronique Noyen. Véronique is Professor of Strategy at the HEC Business School in Paris. Thanks very much for being with us. So Macron was elected on this pro-business platform. He's always argued that the key to bringing down the country's near 10% unemployment rate is by making these changes in what's seen as a very rigid labour market. How's he going to do that? What is in these proposed reforms that is causing so much anger as well?
Well, I'm not sure you can consider that he has caused so much anger. I think that you can argue on the content, on the reach of these reforms, but you cannot argue on the fact that these reforms that are going to be enforced are a major political achievement. France was supposed to be a country that could not be reformed, and we have today the demonstration that it can be reformed. Of course, there are people in the streets. There might have been maybe 200,000, 400,000 people in the street, but that's not much. That's the normal, I would say, resistance in a country like France. Other demonstrations were able to gather more than 1 million people, so it's about nothing. And I think that's a real achievement on the part of Macron and his government.
But this Code du Travail, as it's known in France, is over 3,000 pages long. It's 100 years old. It's considered sacrosanct by the unions. Previous presidents have tried to reform it, but they've ended up backing down when unions have filled the streets in large numbers. You say that the numbers are not big right now, but that could change, couldn't it? I mean, what makes Mr. Macron believe that he can succeed where so many others have tried and failed?
He was very skillful in dividing the unions by organizing a series of private talks with the unions, and that may explain why there was not that many people in the street. And I think the cleverest part comes from the content of the reform, because there was no red flag. If you look at previous reforms, there were things that was I would say, very aggravating or that could raise anger. In the case of this reform, there's nothing really spectacular, nothing really to get angry at. There are a multitude of small changes that in all make a difference, but in themselves, first, they are, I would say, marginal, and secondly, they are very hard to understand. So he was able to defeat his opponents by means of excessive complexity.
How much of a factor is Macron's personal popularity in all of this?
I think that he made a few political and communication blunders that explain his fall in the polls. So he said to people that he was talking to entrepreneurs, and he was congratulating the entrepreneurs for their energy, for their dynamism, and he was comparing them with people that are nothing, and that has been very badly perceived by the population. He made another political blunder by saying that people that were opposing the labor reforms were lazy. And in French, lazy, it has a much negative connotation, much more negative connotation than in English. And so there was little things like that, but I think it's nothing really serious, because he has created a momentum that will enable him to make major reforms in the coming month.
Veronique Nguyen, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
It's been 100 days since 4 Arab countries imposed an embargo against Qatar. Now, despite Qatar's strong financial position, the blockade has produced a strain on the economy. But it's also created some opportunities for an economy built on natural gas wealth to diversify and expand trade links. The International Monetary Fund says the economy is adjusting to the shock after the diplomatic rift with its major trading partners. Imports shrunk by 40% in the first month of the blockade in June and recovered slightly in July. Transport costs have gone up by close to 9%. The cost of food has risen 2%. That's mostly down to the land and sea restrictions imposed by Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the UAE. But the IMF says the total inflation rate, that is the increase of general prices of goods, services, and energy, remains low at less than 1%. Qatar is also looking beyond its traditional trading partners and expanded its trade links with Turkey, Iran, Russia, Oman, Kuwait, and India. And on the domestic front, there have been a slew of reforms, like granting visa-free travel for 80 nationalities to boost tourism. And it is still business as usual in Qatar's traditional markets, as Step Vassen finds out.
Souk Waqif is a traditional heart here in Doha, where visitors get lost in small alleyways looking for clothes, for jewelry, for spices, for handicrafts. And it started as a market for traders decades ago, but now it's mostly a tourist center. These traders are telling us that it's business as usual, despite the boycott by neighboring countries, although some are complaining that they had to put up the prices because of higher transportation costs.
We used to receive most of our merchandise from various countries through our Dubai office, but now we deal directly with those countries like Turkey, Oman, and Kuwait. The prices went up a little bit, like 1 to 2%.
To attract more visitors, Qatar has waived visa restrictions for more than 80 nationalities, and it's also offering special tourist packages.
I think I am safer in Qatar than I am in London, and I do think the Qatari people would look after the people who are here.
What are you looking for as a tourist if you're here?
As a tourist,
yeah.
I love the souk here, absolutely amazing. I love your buildings, they are all like sculptures. I'm an artist.
It's late at night and the souk is still bustling with activity. People are having food here and there's shisha. And not many seem to be too concerned about the blockade.
And that is our show for this week. Remember, get in touch with us by tweeting me at @HazemSeeker and use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or drop us an email. Countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. There's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. That is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Hazem Seeker from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.